About 15 years ago, I took a writing class with the intention of writing a story about my Italian American family on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx. Now, at that time, I was still working in the museum, and academia always had me struggling with my desire to weave together history and facts and research, but then also make the story interesting and compelling to the general public. My story had a lot of rough and tumble characters, and I didn't know how to integrate everything. And so the teacher suggested that I read Helene Stapinski's Five-Finger Discount. Helene is a journalist, and she wrote this book about her family in Jersey City. There were stories about all of these criminal family members, but what she also did was create a portrait of Jersey City itself, and it discusses the corruption that has always existed there. And while we're learning about the city, we're also learning about Helene's family. I loved it, and I immediately became a huge fan of Helene. And it wasn't until many years later that I got to meet her. She was assigned by the New York Times to write a story about Arthur Avenue. And she came on one of my Arthur Avenue tours, and we got on like a house on fire. In fact, the other people who were on the tour, they assumed we had known each other forever because that's the way it felt. Sometimes it's not a good idea to meet your heroes. This was not one of those times. Helene is amazing. And in 2017, she wrote Murder in Matera, which I think is one of the best books about Italy to have come out in the past 10 years. It's another captivating memoir, and it blends Helene's Italian family history, true crime, and personal discovery. What she does is investigate a century-old family mystery. It's the story of her great-great-grandmother Vita, who was rumored to be a loose woman and potentially involved in a murder in southern Italy. So Helene takes us to Basilicata, the region which is at the instep of Italy's boot, and she spends nearly a decade unraveling the truth behind her family's dark past. There's Helene's search, and then the follow-up investigation about the murder, and then there are stories about her persistent efforts with the help of local people who help her uncover the real story behind the murder. And it's different from the family lore that she grew up with, but it's even more interesting. What Helene had to do was put together the pieces of Vita's life in the 1870s. And then as she does so, she comes upon all of these unexpected truths about her own identity. So Murder in Matera is, again, a vivid picture of a time and place, but it's also a personal journey that reveals this kind of unknown region today. She uses the tragic tale of Vita's life to create a narrative that's kind of a literary whodunit, as well as self-discovery. Now, while Helene was doing all of this research, she also published several travel articles about Matera and Basilicata. There was a piece for Time magazine where she explored the history of hunger that underlies Italy's food culture, which is really in contrast to our idea of Italy as this place where food is just falling out of every corner. She also contributed to the New York Times, and she wrote about the transformation of Matera from a place that was considered the shame of Italy to a prized destination. She highlighted the sassi of Matera, the ancient cave dwellings that people have inhabited for centuries. And through her writing, she brings to life the rich history, culture, and culinary traditions of Basilicata. It's a compelling introduction to a lesser-known place, and she invites readers to come along. I recently interviewed Helene, and I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. So you are the only person that I know that has written extensively about the beautiful area of Basilicata, especially along the coast. And it was about a year ago that I did a drive from Puglia going back to Campania and was on the highway, and I didn't really stop more than once, but I could see the sea glittering. I mean, it's so beautiful, and the Ionian Sea is so beautiful and so calm. So can you tell us more about this area that nobody knows anything about?
Well, the best thing about it is that nobody knows about it. So I really shouldn't even be talking to you. But yeah, there are these pristine beaches, sandy, pristine beaches that you're the only one there. It's kind of insane. On the weekends, you get a few people, just Italians, usually local Italians, things like that. But it's really still undiscovered. And Basilicata hasn't really gotten their shit together like Puglia has. And so the tourism industry hasn't hit there. A lot of people have been going to Matera because Matera was voted International Capital of Culture a few years ago. And so it was on the map because of that. And I had written about it too. When I did go to Matera, it was really crowded. that following year. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? What have we wrought? But it hasn't really spread out to the surrounding area. And that's where the beaches are. And it's very close. It's like maybe a half hour from there. So you've got the tourists coming through Matera for maybe a day, maybe staying overnight, but they're not hitting those beach areas or those, coastal areas. And that's where there's incredible stuff. Not that Matera is not incredible. Matera is incredible. But you've got these Greek ruins that no one goes to. There's not even anybody working there. You just walk up and walk around it. There's nobody even guarding any of it. These amazing columns. There's a huge temple there. There's also an amphitheater. I forget what century it's from. Maybe 3rd century BC. I can't remember, but it's all in the book and it's all online and stories I've read. And then they've got a museum down there as well. And it's
Oh, wow. I've never been to that.
with antiquities. And it's like things that look like somebody put in a closet, just took out yesterday. I mean, incredible, mind-blowing, mind-blowing, puts the Met to shame. Just incredibly beautiful objects. This one is one of my favorite objects. It's a wreath made of precious metals and jewels. And it's something that I guess someone maybe wore on their head, or it was maybe on a statue. I'm not sure, but just knocked me over when I saw it. And then dozens and dozens of, vases, Greek vases and things like that. It just, and no one is there. When you go there, they're so happy you walked in the door. And I wrote about them, I think it was the New York Times I did a story for. And they thanked me because no one ever goes. And then, of course, there are the beaches. My favorite place is a place called Riva di Ginepri. And I met the owner one day while I was searching for my own story about my family story about a murder. And I was walking down the beach. It was this spring, I think. It was like maybe May. And I'm approaching this beach resort, I guess you'd call it. And I see this guy standing there. And so we just started chatting. And it turns out his family name was the same as my family name. And, we got to talking. And he was like, oh, you should stay for lunch or whatever. And so I had lunch with him that day. He had a chef. And it's one of the quote unquote tourist spots there. But again, there. And every time I go back, I'm the only one having lunch or dinner. And it's just mind boggling. Riva de Ginepri. And Ginepri means juniper. And he told me that the name comes from it does come from all the juniper bushes there. It's surrounded by juniper bushes. And back millennia ago, when the pirate ships would come in, the people from the area would hide behind those juniper bushes, and they could launch an attack because it's thick, and there's not a lot of trees around there because it's sandy. So it's just an amazing place. And
So even in high season, even in the middle of summer, there aren't a lot of people there?
I mean, I said on the weekend you'll get like a smattering of people, but certainly not crowded. I was there, the last time I was there was again in May, of not this past May, but the May before. And it was late May, maybe early June actually. And I was the only one there. It was a weekday and I was the only person. The weekends do get a little more crowded, but crowded is not the right word. I mean, you get a few people who come. The culture there is strange because nobody swims. It was sort of like people stayed away from the water because of mosquitoes. There was a very big malaria problem. And because of pirates. Centuries, pirates would come in and like kill you or kidnap you or whatever, kidnap your kids. And so people did not come down from those mountain villages, the hill towns really there. They're not that many big mountains there. They wouldn't come down the hill town to the water at all. So they don't know how to swim, which is just, and they're right there. The water is right there. So it's just not part of the culture. It's like when I would tell people I was going to the beach, they'd be like, what are you going to the beach for? For what? Why? Why would you go to the beach?
Culture still existed. I mean, it transcended to me. I did not learn how to swim until I was 4.
Oh, 4. That's late. I learned as like a young teen, I think. But my best friend taught me. She was Irish.
No, my mother
not
actively
them.
told me that if humans were meant to swim, we would have fins. And it wasn't until I just decided and I found a school up in New Paltz, New York, that specialized in teaching adults that never learned how to swim. And then when I read your book, I was like, oh yeah, there's like
Why?
ancestral cultural component to why my family was so anti the beach.
Yeah. Yeah. There's reasons for things in your family. Like you just think they're crazy, but then you realize why they did that. Like one time I was asking my mother about baking because no one in my family ever baked. And I said, well, how come you didn't learn to bake from grandma? And how come you didn't teach me how to bake? She said, well, we were too poor. We didn't have an oven. There you go. That would explain it. Who's baking if you don't have an oven? You can't do it.
Yeah. Well, and also in those old villages, they had those wood burning ovens. You can't really control the heat. Like you need for cakes and cookies. You can do bread, but that's it.
Yeah. And they were usually communal ovens. They didn't have their own. They would all have to share the oven in the town. But yeah, so the water it's there for the taking, and it's gorgeous. And I can't recommend it highly enough. I can't. And there are also places to stay around there that are really cheap and incredibly beautiful resorts and little agritourism palazzo type places that they've changed into sort of hotels part-time, but they're working farms too. That's how they stay afloat. So
Do you recommend staying in a place like that right on the beach or staying in one of the small towns?
I mean, I think the places a little further back from the beach are better. My favorite places are San Teodoro Nuovo, it's called. It's just owned by a woman she's a Marchesa. And I was staying there. I didn't realize she was a Marchesa. I had found it online. It just looked beautiful. So I was like, I'm going to stay here. It was during the research. And so I had booked a place with her. And when I went into town to talk to the people I knew in Bernaldo when I was doing the research, they said, where are you staying? Because I usually would stay in Bernaldo. And I said, oh, I'm staying at San Teodoro Nueva. The Marchesa. You're staying with the Marchesa? I was like, what Marquesa? What are you talking about? Like, I didn't even know that the woman was a Marchesa, right? She's part of the Visconti family. She wasn't a Visconti, but she was married to a Visconti. And so when they first got married or early on in the marriage, she went down to this place with him because these were like the hunting grounds for the Viscontis in the South. And they had this beautiful palazzo there and they would go whenever. And so when she got divorced, she said, I want that. Because she loved it so much in Basilicata. It was mind-blowing to her, as it was to me. And so she got that property. And so she turned it into this, well, it was a farm. It's always been a working farm. But she also transformed it into this agritourism business. And so people can stay on the property now. And it's like staying at the Garden of Eden. So it's crazy, crazy beautiful. And it's like 10 minutes from the beach. And you have to have a car down there because there's no public transportation or anything. So staying 10 minutes from the beach, you can even probably bike there if you wanted to. But that's my main choice, San Teodoro. But there's also places, there's a couple of places in Bernaldo, which again isn't too far either. It's like maybe 20 minutes. You definitely need a car from there probably to go to the beach. But Giardino Giamperduto is one of the places that I stay at frequently when I go to Bernaldo. It's just this beautiful place. It used to be a cheese factory, basically. Not a factory, but a cheese making place. I forget what the word is in Italian. It's right on the edge of town and it overlooks the valley. And it's just like this incredible view. And the guy who runs it is really terrific. He's a local lawyer. He actually helped me find the murder. That's how I came to know. I wouldn't have even known that hotel was there. And so now when I go, I usually stay there in Bernaldo. If I am staying in town in Bernaldo, that's my favorite place. There's also the Francis Ford Coppola Hotel in town, right in the middle of town.
You stayed there?
No, because it's too expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, the last time I was there, which was a while ago, it was like the minimum was $500 a night, but it's probably like twice that now. Palazzo Margherita, and it's incredible. It's totally incredible, and I wish I could stay there, but it's really kind of out of my budget. But people like Mick Jagger stay there. Obviously, Sofia Coppola, when she comes to town, she stays there. All the Coppola kids, but they do have a restaurant. And it's just magical. The whole place is magic. And if you're lucky, they'll take you on a tour of the hotel. It's got this incredible garden and it's just really, really beautiful. But it's definitely worth having dinner there. So,
yeah. And I mean, what's interesting, though, is he has this place it's small, right? I mean, there's not a lot of rooms, but
no, there's only a few. Yeah.
The celebrity clientele or the wealthy clientele that are coming through, do you have any idea what they do when they're in the area?
I imagine they go to the beach, and they go to Di Ginepri. I know the guy at Di Ginepri definitely facilitates the people who are the celebrities who are staying, bring them over or whatever, get them over there to hang out at the beach because the beach is just stunning.
Yeah, and it's like if you don't swim well, as I can technically swim, but still not well, right? That water is very reassuring because it's very salty, it's very calm.
Yeah, you're not drowning in that water. You got to go out like I don't know, maybe a half mile to even get in over your head. I don't think I've ever even gotten in over my head there. It's like a bathtub.
A big bathtub where you might potentially run into Mick Jagger.
This is true. It's paradise.
Matera used to be part of Puglia, but I feel like Matera and all of Basilicata, even though it's right next to Puglia, the one thing that I've experienced there is the people are so nice. And I don't want to, I'm not saying anything negative about people in Puglia, but in comparison, the people in Basilicata are so kind.
They really are. I mean, they've become like family to me. They are incredibly welcoming. And, the first time I went down, these people I barely knew. Their brother had lived in New York City. And so he put me in touch with them. And that's how I met them. And they just welcomed me like family. They brought me into their house and they cooked me fresh pasta and just it really, really helped with everything. And when you first get there, people can be a little bit like, wait, who are you? But as soon as you get to know them and they open up, they're completely your family.
And they're usually probably, I'm sure, curious about how you got there. Puglia has 2 airports, and that's how Italians really started going there. I always say Puglia is kind of the Florida of Italy. It's where the stressed out people from Milan go on vacation because they can just fly from Milan to Bari or Brindisi. But there's no airport in Basilicata.
They have trains. The trains go to Metaponto, which is the beach, basically.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yeah. You can get off at Metaponto, but I mean, it's not on the beach, but it's near the beach. Metaponto is where Spartacus rested with his troops. It's where Hannibal was when he was like in Italy, coming up from Africa with his elephants. I think his brother's head was delivered to him at Metaponto. So it has this incredible history, but it's also a beach. And the train definitely does stop there. And I mean, the trains don't exactly always run on time down there, but you can get there. I've done it many times. There's several ways to go. I have flown into Puglia and driven. I have taken the train from Rome all the way down to Metaponto. I've taken the train to Potenza and driven from there. Potenza's a little further north. And then I've driven from Rome. I've pretty much done it. My favorite way is definitely the train, to take the train. The problem with going to Metaponto is it's hard to rent a car because there's so few people traveling there that car rental is like few and far between. You have to kind of arrange for them to meet you at the train station with the car, or if you've made friends, have your friends pick you up and then deal with the car rental because it's not easy. And that's why people don't go there. It's not easy. But once you get down there, the living is easy. The food is amazing and it's super cheap. And, when I was eating at Riva di Ginepri, they were just pulling the seafood out of the water, with nets. It's really something. Yeah.
There's so many places in that part of Italy where the beaches are about 1,000 times better than they are on the Amalfi Coast or the Cinque Terre. And this past summer, I was in Palinuro, which is at the southern end of Cilento, very close to the border of Basilicata. And I was eating some razor clams that I could swear were just doused in butter because they were so rich. It never tasted anything like that was so unmanipulated and so delicious. And I think the plate costs $10 for a pile of razor clams larger than my head.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. I finally took my kids there. Well, I took them when they were little, but they didn't really remember it. My daughter was a year old. My son was 4 when I started researching the book. And then it was so difficult having little kids with me. I never took them again for the research. And so finally, my daughter I guess they were both teenagers. Dean might have been in college at this. I can't remember. They were grown. And so we finally went. It was after the book came out, and we went down just for vacation, And so it was me, my husband, and the 2 kids, and we're at the beach, and we're mid-water, and my daughter is in front of me, and she turns around, she says, "Why haven't we been coming here?" What the hell? I was like, well, I have been coming. You have not, So they were just like minds blown, and all our favorite meals were at that beach club. I use club loosely, Riva di Ginepri. It's this recipe from Leonardo's mother. It's figs, little tomatoes, and I think pancetta with fresh pasta. It sounds really basic, but it was the best thing I ever ate. And then the seafood too, which is always good. But we were looking at each other like, can you believe this dish? And it took like 10 minutes to make it. And it was super cheap. It wasn't even on the menu because it was his mother's recipe. And he said, "Oh, I have a special recipe I'm going to make for you from mother's." So if you go, ask for that. Except to be in season, obviously. It's the summer. but it was midway through the research. I had written about San Teodoro Nuovo, the place that I'd mentioned to you. And the Marchesa found out I was in town again. I wasn't staying there at the time. I was staying in Bernalda. And she said, "Oh, can you come and meet me for drinks tonight? I have a surprise for you." And I said, "Okay." So about 5 o'clock, I drove over. She had two couples there who had come because they had read my Time story.
Oh, wow.
And it was so weird to meet people who had traveled thousands of miles to the spot that you're standing on because of you.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, I hope you have a good time. And they're like, "Oh my God, it's amazing." But yeah, so there's not a lot of people going down there. I think a few people got down there because of the stories that I had written. But again, it's just so hard to get to.
Yeah. You got to be willing to drive. But I would say driving in Basilicata is very easy.
Super easy.
Okay. So no problem with
Totally on the
driving.
road. The roads are great.
The roads are empty. Yeah.
But they're good roads. They're not like messed up. They aren't potholes or anything like that. They're really, really well maintained. Yeah. So it's really undiscovered still. And that's what those stories are about, how undiscovered it is, the ones that I've written. And it's a little bit more discovered, but certainly not to the point that Puglia is.
No. Puglia, and I feel like Puglia is also really has invested so much in luxury tourism that doesn't benefit the local people very much. I mean, it's just service industry jobs that are low paying, and a lot of that money is just leaving Puglia. It's going to big international conglomerates, and I feel like there's a tension there between tourism and the local people because of that. And I think when you go to parts of Campania and Basilicata where really truly local people own the beach clubs, the hotels, the restaurants, even if they're not, flush with tourists, the money, whatever is made, still stays in the community, and that creates for a better relationship between the tourists and the locals.
Yeah, definitely. You're right. I hadn't really thought it through, but you're totally right.
So in Murder in Matera, there is this beautiful passage within the book about the voyage that your ancestors, my ancestors, that all Southern Italian immigrants who were coming from mainland Southern Italy had to make to get from their small town in Puglia, Basilicata, wherever, to Naples, to actually get on the boat. And here in the United States, we know so much about Ellis Island and what people experienced when they arrived there and they got off the boat. The Godfather, of course, immortalizes that where Vito Andolini becomes Vito Corleone and that whole passage. But your book was the only thing I'd ever read that described what happened in Naples. And it was such a beautiful chapter. And also you were so in love with the beautiful lungomare of Naples, as I am, as is anybody with eyes and
anyone who ever saw it. Yep.
Has any appreciation for beauty in the world. It's one of the most beautiful places on earth, in my opinion. But I was thinking of it again because I was on that lungomare with my friend Michele, who's Italian, but has relatives in the United States. And I was explaining to him as we were looking at the actual building where all of those immigrants left from and how it's just basically used as storage now. And I said that this should be a museum. And he was actually really moved by that idea for Italians to understand how they had to leave their own country. So for those, I've read the book, but I wonder if we could just back up for a bit and you could describe what it was like to research and write that piece of the book.
It's not a thing anymore, right? You don't have people leaving from there in mass quantities, right? So I had to try and recreate what that would have been like. So I went down to Naples. It was my last stop on my research tour, pretty much. I had already found the murder at that point, but now I was doing extra research, right, to recreate what it was like for Vita to have left. And so went down to Naples. I was looking up some stuff in Naples as well, and the archives couldn't find anything. That was like, forget it. It's like too complicated, and the bureaucracy was insane. So I finally just gave up. And I said, well, let me just see if I can trace what it would have been like to leave here. And so then I started to look for the building that they would have left from. And I found it. And again, it's like you said, it's storage. It's like boarded up. It's not even like someone in the building. It's just like no one's there. It's just a warehouse or something now. And it just killed me that there wasn't even a plaque. I mean, like something like 9 million people left Italy, most of them from Naples. And there's nothing to like say this is where your relatives left from or what. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Yeah, there's an Ellis Island, although Ellis Island wasn't really Ellis Island as we know it until the 80s or 90s. So then I wanted to know what it was like to leave on a ship from there. Like, what was that like? And there, of course, there are no immigrant ships leaving anymore. That's not happening. But I found a ferry that was going to Ischia. So I got on that boat and went out, and that view, which you see from the harbor as well, it's this beautiful view, but it being on a boat and seeing it and then turning around and leaving Italy, and just channeling what she must have been going through. Because really that view, I say, is the most beautiful view you could have in Italy, right? The view from the harbor in Naples, right? So it's sort of like right before you leave forever, you're seeing the most beautiful view of your life. Because these people are coming from these tiny little towns where it was really hard scrabble. It's beautiful, but in a really rough way, right? To be at the spot where like extreme beauty and you are leaving it. And so then I was like, wait, so that's why every pizzeria has a picture on the wall. You know what I mean? Because that was the last thing they saw before they left. And it's mind-boggling.
And I say to people too, it's mythically beautiful because that is where Homer set his encounter of Odysseus and the sirens.
Yeah.
Where he's being
it's
lured.
Beautiful, right? And thousands of years, right? Yeah, because it's naturally beautiful. It's nothing man-made. But yeah, that sort of like that combination of beauty but sadness that you're going to be leaving this, and then you wind up in New York, which has its own, appeal. Obviously, I live here, but you're not going to see that beauty again. Especially those people who left at that time. When they left at the turn of the century, they weren't going back. I was the first one to go back in my family. So
No. But you think of, I think where your family's from in the area around Matera, which is the landscape is so beautiful and rugged, but it's so rocky and difficult to then go to Naples on these trains, which that itself was an incredible journey. People had never even left their small towns. Now
the trains just were built like the year my great-great-grandmother left. Like that's when I started the train.
So that's an experience altogether.
They had
To
never
get
seen
on
a
the
train.
thing.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been frightening to see this giant thing. You have to get on it and just pass through all those towns on the way to see the landscape as you're going. You're leaving it slowly.
Yeah, and you're seeing the varying landscape, like let alone the heat, bathroom situations, like. But then they arrived in Naples, and what I just never knew or thought about was that people actually had to sleep outside on the waterfront.
Yes, so generally you had a ticket, but sometimes people didn't. They just went down there and had to get their ticket. And they had to go through this excruciating process, similar to Ellis Island, but in reverse, right? Because you're leaving. They're doing the lice check and the eye check and the whole thing. They want to make sure you don't have any guns. You have to go through major security and just all these health checks and things like that. So it could take days for you to actually get on the ship. And so, yeah, we're talking about poor people. If they're lucky, they've got $1 in their pocket. They would bring their food with them. They would pack like a couple of days' lunches for them and their kids. And they would just huddle together on the street and sleep on the street. And eventually they started to build little hotels and stuff for people, Naples. It eventually grew up. I think the ship companies were forced by the Italian government to do it because people were living on the street and it was a real scene down there. And it was like, dudes, you need to build something for these people. You can't just have them sleeping on the street. So the ship companies, I think, financed some hotels and things like that. But they were crappy, crummy places to stay. I mean, you're probably better off sleeping on the street, to be honest. And yeah, it was rough. Some people who didn't have money for the train walked. And if it was before the train, because people left before the train, I think came in 1892, I think, from Basilicata. So before then, you either had to get some kind of a wagon, like hire a wagon to take you, which would have been probably too expensive for these people, or a vast majority of people before then walked. And when I first started researching the book, I thought she had walked. So I had started looking into that. And that was the thing. I mean, it took weeks.
Where did you find that research?
I think the historian in Bernalda told me about that. Tatarano. He's also a character in the book. He was very helpful in finding the murder as well. I think he's the one who told me that people used to walk. Because when I first got there, I was like, how the hell did she get to Naples? It just like dawned on me, like, how did she get there? He's like, well, most people walked. And I was like, walk? What do you mean? It's like, they just walked. We got a big bag and they started walking.
Which means they would have been camping for weeks.
Yeah, the whole thing is just mind-boggling. So it's really, the ship ride over was bad enough. That was like almost 2 weeks and was like being in steerage. It was being in steerage. Horrible, horrible conditions. But before you even got to the ship, you had to go through all of that, and just getting from the train station in Naples, if you did take the train from the station in Naples to the waterfront wasn't easy. I traced that. I said, well, okay, how am I going to get from here to there? How would I get there if I was with 2 kids and had no money? And it's not an easy walk. So it's, and also you're coming off of a train into a major city, which no one had ever seen who was there. You know what I mean? These people were coming from these tiny villages. I mean, Bernaldo had just a few thousand people. And you're in this major metropolis. And that's a big part of the book as well. Just getting off that train and stepping into this total chaos. People trying to take advantage of you, cops everywhere, and horses going by, and cars going by. I mean, it just must have been incredibly overwhelming. And anybody who left and made it to America was so brave and so strong. And that I didn't realize that until I lived through all of that. You know what I mean? Like, you kind of know, but you don't know until you're there and you see it and you're like, wait a minute. These people were like superheroes. First of all, to have the gumption to even try it, but then to survive it, to get through it.
No language skills. Often people only spoke the dialect of their small hill town, let alone they'd get to
not even Italian. They didn't even speak it. Yeah. They're speaking dialect, and the dialect bears very little resemblance to actual Italian, which of course I learned my first time going. I studied Italian for like a year before I went, and I don't understand anybody and they don't understand me, So there's the language barrier. There's no money, nobody has any money, I mean, sometimes the ship companies would send people over for jobs. And so the ride was paid for by the company that you were going to go work for or whatever. But yeah, no money, no language skills, just poor people, desperate people, which we're seeing now. That's people who come.
Yeah, people are walking across the desert.
I wrote an op-ed about that when Murder Matera came out.
Well, and that's a good reason for learning that story too. I mean, having respect for your ancestors and what they endured, and then looking at other people who are having to do the same thing in 2025.
Yeah.
I mean, big difference between now and 1892, right?
The people were living in poverty in Italy. They weren't eating, I mean, think about it. Think of Italy as this land of abundance, right? And there was this 1% that owned everything, and you worked on a farm and you had to give it all up to them. You were picking the crops for them, not for yourself. You were lucky if you got a piece of stale bread and a tomato at the end of the day. And that's why people left. And no one talked about it. Like, relatives never talked about it. And so we don't know that story. And so I had to dig it out. So that's what that book became. It started as a search for a murder, but it really became the story of the people there and how they got here.
When I was there with my friend Michele, looking at that building too, the cruise ships were coming in. So you have these giant cruise ships where people are getting off for a day. And then you've got that building, which is a beautiful old building. And it's the same period of architecture as Ellis Island. And it's got a big, beautiful sculpture of the Virgin Mary on the top wearing a crown. It's so small, it's dwarfed by the ships themselves. And I just thought about the contrast and people getting on and off those ships, passing by that building, getting on and off ferries to Ischia and to Capri, and the heartbreak and the beauty that was contained inside of that building. And nobody even knows why it is.
Nobody has any idea. Yeah. The history's just lost. It's really hard.
I hold out some hope that maybe at some point in Italy they would turn that into a museum. I think that there's still a shame that Italians have that they had to let so many of their citizens go. There's also a lot of prejudice between the North and the South. Nobody has written about this. In all of the books of Italian American history
I was shocked that it wasn't done. You know what I mean? I figured I'd be using other stuff to help me do my thing, and there was nothing there. So I was really starting from scratch. Like you said, there's a lot of stuff on the other side. So stuff, and from the Godfather point of view.
And when I got to that part of the book, I mean, it was like my jaw was dropped, because obviously your story is unique, but there were pieces of your story that I knew from studying history. But when I read that, I said, I'd never even thought about this before.
Yeah, no, I know. I hadn't either, really. Like I said, when I got to the town, I was like, well, how did she get to Naples? it's, you know, thinks of that, right? You just know they left from Naples. And the crazy thing in my family was that we thought we were from Naples because when they're here for a couple of generations and then you say, well, where are you from? Oh, from Naples. They came from Naples. They left from Naples, but they weren't from Naples. So all these people think they're from Naples, but they're not. They're from Basilicata or Calabria.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but when are you going back next? When's your next trip?
I don't have anything in the pipeline yet for there. I'm actually going to Poland, hopefully in the fall. So I've just applied for a grant to do research on the Polish side of my family, which has been neglected all this time while I've been researching Italy for the past 20 years. The Italy stuff was much closer because of my mother, and you get a lot of the stories from your mother. My father never talked about anything. My father's Stapinski, obviously. And so I went finally in May with my kids, and I found out that we're Jewish. My great-grandfather was Jewish, not only married a Catholic, but changed his name. So, yeah, so I just found out the name, and I'm doing some DNA research. I'm trying to find out what happened to his family because they're probably all murdered. The town that we're from, Rzeszów, is about 2 hours outside of Krakow, and it was one of the Nazi killing fields, and people were murdered there and just put in a pit, you know. So it's a little darker than the Matera stuff. Although the Matera stuff was pretty dark, I have to say. It turned out to be pretty dark, but this is even probably a little darker. So I'm going back to try and do some research to find out what that story was, because I don't.
Thank you so much for listening. All of these episodes are free. They're available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and they always will be free. But if you would like to join our subscriber community on Substack, there you get access to our chat where you can ask questions, and we have once a month Ask Me Anything About Italy Zoom calls. And even if you can't attend the Zoom calls live, you can email me your questions ahead of time, and I'll answer them live on the Zoom. The next day, I send out the replay, and you can watch it there. If you would like a one-on-one trip consultation, go to feasttravel.com. That's where you'll find all of the information. And let me know what else you would like to learn about Italy. This podcast is really focused on the lesser-known places. You don't need another podcast about Positano or Tuscany, believe me. Let me know what you'd like to learn.